I've had a desire to play Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time in the way they were always meant to be played. These two games were important to not only Nintendo, but for gaming in general. They laid the foundation for 3D gaming. Because let's be honest, this is not this. Because my family skipped the N64 in favor of the PS1, that opportunity slipped through my fingers. I've always felt that I missed out on playing some of the best games in existence. When the expansion pack for the Nintendo Switch Online service was announced, I really didn't give it much thought. Another round of emulated games I've purchased in the past and gave up on quite quickly. I've also found myself disinterested because I've had to play those games with a controller that's not suited for the gameplay. But then Nintendo announced that they were going to also release a remade N64 controller to play them. That got my attention, and I couldn't wait to see what was to come with the service as I was absolutely sold on it. Though, that absoluteness became quite murky once the price was announced. Does the price increase justify the return with what the service offers? I've been battling my decision to buy into the service ever since that day. I've talked myself into it, then upon further thought, I go in the opposite direction. This has happened over and over. That is, until I finally concluded that this is probably the only way I was going to be able to play Mario 64 with a real N64 controller, without having to hook up my old console to my CRT TV. I just set up everything to make a video about the reasons why I decided to pay for the expansion pack. My script was written and my film shots were planned. Though, while reflecting on it again, I ultimately decided not to do it. The entire point of the video was to say that it was the easiest and most authentic way to play those games because of the controller Nintendo released for the service. Right when I was about to record the video, I got word that the controller works with the Mario 3D All-Stars collection. That was all I needed to conclude that the service was not worth the money. There just isn't enough to justify the price. It includes access to a few N64 games, a handful of Sega Genesis games, and DLC for Animal Crossing. The N64 games are the draw for the whole expansion pack for me. The Genesis games are an added bonus, and the DLC seems like a ripoff. I promise that I will most likely never touch that DLC. If you like Animal Crossing, this is probably really good for you. If you're like me and have never touched an Animal Crossing game, it means absolutely nothing. As for the Genesis games, I can already play most of them on the Sega Genesis Classics Collection and the Sega Genesis Mini. The Nintendo 64 games are the real reason why I'm interested in it. It doesn't help that people have been reporting that N64 games aren't performing well. I have some faith that Nintendo will iron out the issues with performance in time. Though, maybe they won't. Nintendo's track record isn't great with this kind of stuff. Even though I'm not buying the expansion pack, there are some good things about it. I've come up with 3. I don't know how well they'll be received by everyone, but here's my thinking. The expansion pack means Nintendo is thinking about the online service. I thought that they would let the NES and SNES games sit there alone until the death of the Switch, but that's not even close to what they're doing. They just added 2 more consoles, which is a really good thing. I'm not sure we'll see any other consoles added in the future, but having 4 is fantastic. Another positive about the expansion pack is that it's brought the N64 to the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I can't think of another time besides the 90s that the N64 is being talked about and discussed in this much depth by so many people. I personally hadn't thought about the Nintendo 64 in years. The only time I can think of having it on my mind was when the 3D All-Stars compilation was relevant. It's great to see the enthusiasm some people have for the console. If you've watched my channel before, you know how I feel about using the original controller the games were made to be played with. These games were designed and programmed with this controller in mind. By Nintendo offering a way to play them the exact way they were meant to be played is something I really admire about the service. And I know there are more modern takes on the N64 controller, some that are more ergonomic and make more sense with their layouts. But these games weren't meant to be played with those controllers. They were designed around the weird 3-pronged spaceship Nintendo developed. Don't get me wrong, I haven't always been a fan of the N64 controller. Going back to the playground at recess, I used to use it to prove my point that the PlayStation 1 was vastly superior to the Nintendo 64. The PlayStation controller is way more traditional, in contrast to the N64's radical design. I'm glad Nintendo remade this controller as close to the original as possible. With the Wii and Wii U, we never had this option. even for other consoles like the NES and Super Nintendo. Nintendo tried to give us a catch-all controller that functioned for all the consoles on the Virtual Console, which, to their credit, functioned well in most cases, but it's not the original controller. The feel of the buttons, the spacing between the buttons, the feel of the analog sticks, and the shoulder buttons all felt off from any of the original controllers. To overcome this, I imported the Club Nintendo Super Famicom controller that was only available in Japan. This is a perfect replica of the Super Famicom controller, and it felt great when playing Super Nintendo games. But even this controller isn't perfect. It came close, but it doesn't have the concave X and Y buttons like the North American SNES controller has. Yes, this is very nitpicky, but to me it's really important. We didn't get a proper NES and SNES controller to use with the Virtual Console until the classic consoles came out in 2016 and 2017 respectively. And when I got those controllers, I used them and enjoyed those games significantly more. They were just as I remembered playing them. By Nintendo offering an official N64 controller to play those N64 games is a really big selling point for me. It's going to give me an authentic way to play those iconic games. Many have brought up valid points and arguments in favor of not paying for the expansion pack. I just now decided not to buy it. By already having the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, I think I'll get my Nintendo 64 fix until more games are released for it. Don't get me wrong, there are other games on the service that I want to play. Sin and Punishment has been on my list for a long time, but I can wait a little longer to play it. I haven't played Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, but I did beat it on the 3DS, which is probably good enough for now. In all honesty, the service probably isn't all that bad, especially if you don't intend on playing those games online. The N64 and N64 games deserve a moment in the spotlight. It's the console that was a defining moment for Nintendo. It gave us some of the most acclaimed games of all time. Mario 64 was the ultimate 3D platformer of the time. It showed that Mario could also do that, and not just run to the right. It also changed the way we play The Legend of Zelda with Ocarina of Time. That game is still being lauded as the best game ever made. Though it's too bad Nintendo put these games out in the state that they are currently in, and are charging so much for them. For most people, I'm sure these games will be just fine. Though for many others, these games aren't at the quality to justify the price Nintendo is asking them to pay. Do those performance and graphical issues matter to you? It's valid if they do. It costs almost the same price as a full retail game. I hope there will be some updates to smooth over and fix the problems that have been shown. Until that day, maybe hold off on the service. It's already been announced that more games will come in due time, and there are several other options out there to play these games. As for me, I'm holding off on paying for the expansion pack for now. I can always opt into it when the games justify the price. I haven't really experienced the Nintendo 64, so I think I can wait a little longer. Until then, I'll play Mario 64 and the 3D All-Stars collection. After that, maybe I'll just play something else for my backlog.